The smell hit me first, a cloying sweetness fighting with the sharp metallic tang of ozone that always clung to my ham radio gear. Something was off. My basement workshop, usually a shrine to organized chaos and static electricity, felt disturbed. The air was too still, the faint hum of the transformer too subdued. I stood in the doorway, my 72-year-old joints protesting the chill from the open concrete floor above. Eleanor always said I had an internal barometer for trouble, a gift honed over 35 years in the DEA. I learned to read the subtle tells, a bead of sweat on a liar's upper lip, a flicker in the eye that betrayed a hidden thought, the almost imperceptible tremor in a hand reaching for an alibi. Mark, my nephew, my sister's boy, was due any minute. He'd called yesterday, voice tight with forced cheerfulness, asking if he could borrow the truck and pop by for a bit. Mark. I'd mentored him, coached him through his own youthful indiscretions, even pulled strings to get him into the academy before he washed out after 6 months. He always had a nervous habit of licking his lips when he was cornered. Just now, as I pictured his face, I saw it again. "Just thought I'd check the batteries on your backup generator, Uncle John," he'd said, his words smooth as worn leather, but his eyes, when I'd spoken to him on that crackling line, had darted towards the corner of the basement, the corner where the bulkier equipment cases sat. "Don't want you stranded if the snows hit hard," he'd added, a statement that felt more like a veiled threat. It was October. The first real snows in western Colorado were still weeks away. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 6. My coffee, usually strong enough to strip paint, tasted like lukewarm water. The subtle wrongness intensified, prickling the back of my neck like static. He wasn't here to check the generator. I didn't know it then, but in 3 hours the police would be at my door, and my nephew would wish he'd never set foot in my house. Mark arrived 20 minutes later, the rumble of my old Ford F-150's engine a familiar sound against the vast silence of the Colorado plains. He climbed out, a little too quickly, a little too casually. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and sure enough, his tongue flicked out, wetting his dry upper lip. "Hey, Uncle John, generator looks fine. Just wanted to say hi. Grab some beers." He held up a 6-pack, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly. We sat in the kitchen, the air thick with unspoken things. He talked about a business opportunity back east, vaguely mentioned some investors he was meeting. All the while, his gaze kept drifting towards the basement door. Finally, he made his excuses, kissed my cheek with dry, papery lips, and left. The moment his truck disappeared down the long, dusty drive, I was back in the basement. The ozone smell was stronger now, mixed with something else, chemical. Faint, but unmistakable. I went straight to the corner he'd glanced at. The equipment cases were heavy-duty, military surplus affairs I'd used to transport my old rig. I ran my hand along the side of the largest one, the one that housed the amplifier and power supply. My finger snagged on a nearly invisible seam, a recent scuff mark marring the otherwise uniform dust. It wasn't there this morning. My gut clenched. 35 years of interrogations, undercover ops, and dismantling drug rings had taught me one thing: a disturbed surface always hides something beneath. With a practiced flick of my wrist, I found the hidden latch. It sprang open silently. Inside, nestled amongst the coils of wire and vacuum tubes, was not radio equipment, but several bricks of what looked and smelled sickeningly like high-grade cocaine. Beside them lay a digital scale, a stack of small plastic baggies, and a thick wad of cash. Federal felony. The sheer audacity stunned me. He hadn't just borrowed the truck. He'd used my secure, isolated workshop as a stash house. But why? Then it hit me. Mark's gambling debts.
The whispers I'd overheard from my sister years ago about boys with dangerous friends. He was in deep. This wasn't just a stash, it was insurance, or a payoff. And he'd planted it here, knowing I was the only one who'd find it. He'd probably call the cops himself later, anonymously, pinning it all on me. My betrayal wasn't just betrayal, it was a meticulously planned takedown. Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but from a cold, quiet fury. He wasn't just my nephew, he was my blood. He'd spat on every lesson I'd ever taught him. He'd used my sanctuary, my dead wife's memory, to try and save his own worthless skin. But he forgot something crucial. I'd spent my life catching men like him, and I wasn't about to go down for his sins. My hands, steady, despite the tremor of rage, went to work. The police would be alerted within hours, likely by Mark himself, once he'd established his alibi. Time was short. My old instincts kicked in, the ones that had served me well, from dusty Border Patrol checkpoints to sterile FBI labs. I needed to shift the narrative, redirect the suspicion, and do it without leaving a single trace. First, the evidence. I carefully donned a pair of thin nitrile gloves I kept for handling old documents. I photographed everything in situ, the drugs, the cash, the scale, the bags, just in case. Then I began the transfer. The cocaine bricks were heavy, dense. The smell was overpowering now. I packed them back into the case, but not before taking detailed photos of the batch numbers and the specific cellophane wrapping. Amateur work, likely sourced from a street-level dealer, not a cartel kingpin. Mark's usual MO. I then took the $15,000 cash and divided it. Half I discreetly tucked back into my own wallet, my emergency fund, never logged. The other half, that went into a plain manila envelope. I found a greasy napkin from the diner Mark frequented near his rundown apartment outside Grand Junction, smudged with what looked like pizza sauce, and carefully folded it, placing it on top of the cash. Evidence of his recent presence, unrelated to my workshop. Next, the ham radio itself. It was a Collins S-line rig, classic gear, but Mark wouldn't know that. He'd just see wires and electronics. I carefully repacked the fake drugs, leaving enough space to slide in a small, sealed evidence bag containing a few milligrams of residue I'd scraped from a pipe found years ago during a raid, a souvenir from my final big case before retirement. It was innocuous enough not to warrant immediate lab attention, but specific enough to potentially snag him if they ran it.
I then took the bulk of the physical evidence, the bagged coke, the scale, the Ziplocs, and placed them in Mark's truck's glove compartment. He left it unlocked, trusting my unwitting complicity. In 1987, I tracked a money launderer named Silas by his affinity for imported Turkish cigarettes. He thought he was untouchable, stashed his laundered cash in a rented storage unit miles from his home. But every 2 weeks, he'd buy the same brand from the same small convenience store. I found him by the butts in the trash. Mark was just as predictable. His gambling habit, his need for quick cash, his reliance on my safe haven. He'd left a trail, however faint. I wiped down every surface I'd touched in the basement, the sharp scent of industrial cleaner replacing the ozone. I then picked up the ham radio microphone, a dead key, broadcasting nothing but static. But my voice, calm and measured, recorded the standard call sign protocol. This is... I hesitated, then gave the call sign of a defunct DEA task force I'd once led in El Paso. It was a ghost, a name from my past, a signal only certain old-timers would recognize. A little insurance, a little vengeance.
The flashing blue and red lights painted strobing patterns across my living room walls an hour later. 2 uniformed deputies, accompanied by a stern-faced man in a rumpled suit, a county narcotics detective, judging by the faint whiff of stale coffee and desperation clinging to him, knocked on my door. "Mr. Davies, we received an anonymous tip regarding illegal narcotics stored on this property." My heart gave a single heavy thump, but my face remained impassive. "An anonymous tip? That's concerning. Please come in." The flashing blue and red lights painted strobing patterns across my living room walls an hour later. 2 uniformed deputies, accompanied by a stern-faced man in a rumpled suit, a county narcotics detective, judging by the faint whiff of stale coffee and desperation clinging to him, knocked on my door. "Mr. Davies, we received an anonymous tip regarding illegal narcotics stored on this property." My heart gave a single heavy thump, but my face remained impassive. "An anonymous tip? That's concerning. Please come in." I gestured them inside, my gaze flicking to the detective. His eyes were hard, cynical, classic. I kept my voice low, measured. "Officers, detective, I have no idea what you're talking about. My nephew, Mark, was here earlier today, visiting. Perhaps he's been having some trouble lately." The suited detective's eyes narrowed. "Your nephew? Is he currently on the premises?" "No," I replied. "He borrowed my truck, said he was heading back towards Grand Junction." The detective nodded, a flicker of something. Calculation, maybe satisfaction, crossing his face. "All right, Mr. Davies, we'll need to conduct a search, and we'll need to speak with your nephew. Mind if we take a look in your truck?" The tip mentioned the vehicle specifically. My facade didn't crack. "Of course, it's parked out back. You'll find nothing but fishing gear and old tools." They walked out towards the F-150. I followed, watching as the deputies opened the driver's side door, then the passenger side. They moved with practiced efficiency. Mark's cheap Pumas, the empty beer cans rolling on the floor mat. Then the glove compartment. A deputy pulled it open. Silence. Then a ruffle. He pulled out the manila envelope. He opened it, the greasy napkin sliding out. He looked at the cash, then at the detective, who took a step closer. $15,000, and a pizza napkin. The detective grunted. "Hold on." Another deputy was already back at the truck's trunk. A moment later, he emerged, holding up one of the cocaine bricks, a look of disbelief on his face. "Sir, we found this, wrapped, in the spare tire well." The suited detective stared at me, then at the brick. "Mr. Davies, you said you had no idea what we were talking about?" My gaze drifted towards the empty driveway where Mark's truck had been. "I didn't," I said softly. The detective scoffed. "Then how did this get in your truck?" Suddenly, a patrol car pulled up the drive, its lights now off. A young officer stepped out. He approached the detective, speaking quietly. The detective's eyes widened slightly. He turned back to me, his demeanor shifting entirely. "Mr. Davies." A moment later, he emerged, holding up one of the cocaine bricks, a look of disbelief on his face. "Sir, we found this, wrapped, in the spare tire well." The suited detective stared at me, then at the brick. "Mr. Davies, you said you had no idea what we were talking about?" My gaze drifted towards the empty driveway where Mark's truck had been. "I didn't," I said softly. The detective scoffed. "Then how did this get in your truck?" Suddenly, a patrol car pulled up the drive, its lights now off. A young officer stepped out. He approached the detective, speaking quietly. The detective's eyes widened slightly. He turned back to me, his demeanor shifting entirely. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice clipped, "we just received a clarification. Seems your nephew has a rather extensive record we weren't aware of, and we might have found the source of his recent income." He paused, looking directly at me, a grudging respect dawning in his eyes. "And that call sign you used when you keyed the mic earlier, Ghost Wolf,
We're looking into it. Seems you were more than just retired. That old El Paso call sign. It had worked. The detective continued. Seems your nephew stashed more than just drugs. He stashed his entire operation's working capital and plans in your basement. And apparently, you knew exactly where to find it, and knew exactly who would be looking for him. Mark's face flashed in my mind, licking his lips, the desperation in his eyes. He was a small-time dealer trying to pay off big-time gamblers. The detective nodded towards the patrol car arriving with Mark in the back. He's already singing like a canary, Mr. Davies, talking about needing to frame someone because his creditors were getting impatient. I met the detective's gaze. He played a game he couldn't win.
6 months later. The Colorado wind still howled sometimes, but up here, in a small, sturdy cabin nestled just outside Asheville, North Carolina, it sounded less like a threat and more like a song. The air smelled of pine needles and damp earth, a clean scent that had long ago replaced the stale ozone and desperation of my old life. I'd sold the farmhouse, discreetly, through a lawyer who owed me a significant favor from a case involving a corrupt land developer back in the day. The money from the sale, plus what I'd reclaimed from Mark's planted cash, was enough to live comfortably, simply. My Glenn Miller records were safely packed, but I found myself reaching for them less and less. The jazz still soothed, but the silence was starting to feel companionable rather than lonely. I spent my mornings reading, tending to the small vegetable garden out back, and watching the mist burn off the rolling Blue Ridge Mountains. One Tuesday, the postman delivered a thick, official-looking envelope. Inside was a court summons for Mark. 7 years for trafficking, obstruction of justice. A slap on the wrist, considering. He'd cooperated fully, implicating his bookies, a shadowy outfit my old contacts confirmed were deeply intertwined with organized crime. He'd even provided details about my old El Paso task force, mentioning the Ghost Wolf call sign, and how he'd overheard people talking about my connections in past operations when he was a kid. Apparently, my carefully planted seeds of doubt had blossomed into a full-blown investigation into my own history, a probe that concluded I was a federal agent acting outside official channels, using my knowledge and contacts to preemptively dismantle a criminal enterprise. They'd granted me immunity, a quiet retirement, they called it. I called it a managed retreat. Justice, I'd learned long ago, wasn't always neat. Sometimes mercy was simply knowing when to disappear.
Loyalty, especially blood loyalty, was a fragile thing, easily broken by greed and fear. Mark had chosen greed. He'd broken the chain. And I, in turn, had let him go, not with forgiveness, but with a profound, weary understanding. The most important lesson I ever learned wasn't about catching criminals. It was about knowing when a fight was already lost and when to simply walk away, leaving the wreckage behind. This morning, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the dew-kissed leaves of a young maple tree I'd planted by the porch. It was small, vulnerable, but reaching defiantly towards the light, like me. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the small cabin. No more ghosts, no more games, just the quiet peace of a life reclaimed.